I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Coquitlam, and Musqueam First Nations people. My name is Dr. Leslie Shannon. I'm Associate Professor in the School of Engineering Science and the President's Dream Colloquium Chair for this fall. As our topic is Women in Technology, Recruitment, Retention, and Promotion. And as many of you may know, there's a class that also goes with the Colloquium. In addition to doing this, I'm also the NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering for the BC Yukon region and run a program called West Coast Women in Engineering, Science, and Technology, WEST, based at SFU. Our mission is to engage industry, the community, and students to increase the awareness and participation of women and other underrepresented groups in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM fields of study and career. WEST and this chair inspired this colloquium because we wanted to educate participants on the challenges and solutions that have been identified to improve diversity in hiring, retention, and promotion of women to leadership roles. The President's Dream Colloquium is made up of a speaker series as well as a graduate course. Tonight's speaker, Shari Graydon, is an amazing, award-winning author, advocate, and speaker with 25 years of experience on both sides of the microphone. Shari Graydon founded and currently leads Informed Opinions, the sponsor for tonight's talk, and a nonprofit organization of Media Action, working to amplify women's voices. A former newspaper columnist, TV producer, and commentator for the CBC, she has also served as press secretary to a provincial premier and as president of Media Action, then called Media Watch. Shari has taught courses in communications and presentation skills at Simon Fraser University, written speeches for public officials, and delivered communications and media training to public and private sector organizations across the country. Shari also received the Governor General's Award in commemoration of the Persons Case for her advocacy work on behalf of women the following year, among other impressive accomplishments. And the topic that we asked her to talk to today is women in media. And as you can tell based on this, she is unbelievably qualified. So we look forward to her talk. Thank you so much.
Or as we like to say at Informed Opinions, I have an informed opinion. 27 years ago, I was enrolled in the master's program in communications here at Simon Fraser University. It took me 2 years to get into the program. It was very competitive. I came to my application with a degree in an undergraduate degree in theater and 3 years working for a very large multinational public relations agency. So I was basically a flack. And so the communications department, in its wisdom, didn't actually think I was the best material for the program, so it took me a second year to get in. But really my years at SFU, and in fact my status as a special student prior to even getting into the program, changed my life. So it was in a lecture hall not unlike this, with comfy seats at Harbor Center in 1990, I think it was, that I saw Suzanne Strutt do a guest lecture, not as high-tech as the one I'm going to give to you, and really that mobilized me and sent me off in a completely different direction. So I might give you some context for some of that in a minute, but I'm going to start with a more recent story. In 2005, my husband and I were walking across the parking lot of St. Patrick's Basilica in Montreal, and a TV crew approached us and said, "The Pope has just died. Would you care to comment?" And I said, "No, I don't think so," and kept walking. And from behind me, from my husband's lips, I heard him say, "Sure, I'll comment." And this is a man who had not been to church in 40 years. So I turned around stunned, wondering what pearls of wisdom were going to drop from his beautiful mouth. And I watched him bow his head and solemnly declare, "It's a very sad day for Catholics everywhere." And as we continued on our walk to the Old Port, I turned to him and said, "Honey, that was kind of obvious, wasn't it? And wouldn't it be great if the next Pope were to come up with a progressive policy on contraception that wouldn't marginalize and disenfranchise millions of impoverished Catholic women who are trapped in a cycle of childbearing and child-rearing?" And he said, "Yes, Shari, that would have been great. Too bad you turned down the interview." And that was triply painful because number one, he got on national TV. Sad day for Catholics everywhere. Number two, and I obviously did not. Number two, I had literally done the research. As Leslie mentioned, I was president of Media Watch for 10 years, and we had documented the underrepresentation of women's voices in public discourse. We knew in the 1990s the figures were even lower than this, but in 2010, when I started Informed Opinions, this was the ratio of male to female voices. No good reason for this then, even less so now. But I knew this data, and still I turned down the interview. And number three, given my vast experience on either side of the microphone, I was arguably better equipped than most people to look into a camera and microphone and say what I thought. But I turned down the interview, and as it turns out, I'm not alone. So our research over the last 7 years confirms data that we had in the 1990s, and that is that. Number one, women get invited to speak or opine or comment much less often than their male colleagues, and they turn down the opportunities much more often. So I'm going to ask the women in this room if you have been invited, if not to speak to media, but on panels or in any occasion where you've had an opportunity to amplify your voice, how many of you have equivocated and felt like, yeah, I don't think so? Anybody have that experience? Yeah. So over the course of the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about why that's a problem, what Informed Opinions is doing to address it, because we're all about the solutions end of things, and finally, how you can help. That's the roadmap for tonight. Because my talk was publicized with the addition of women in media and advertising, I'm going to throw you a few bones and share a couple of advertising images that I might not otherwise have included. But in my work with Media Watch over the last 30 years, I started out doing presentations that delved into much more detail about how women were often stereotypically portrayed in advertising. And so in the 1990s, this was an image that I found in a fashion magazine, and I tore it out and used it frequently to university lectures as well as guest talks when I wrote a couple of books about media literacy for kids, and I did guest talks in elementary schools as well. And I'm pleased to report that even in the 1990s, which feels like a long time ago now, some of you may not actually have been born, if I threw this image up and asked the grade sixes in the room, what is your first clue that this woman does not belong at Nassau? They did not have difficulty identifying a few key factors which probably have occurred to you. First of all, she appears to have removed her protective space helmet while on Mars. She's dressed in what can only be described as a Barbie doll-style astronaut outfit, and she appears to be shaving her legs. And so I would invite them. Roberta Bonder was the female astronaut of the day, but today I could invite them to ask whether or not Julie Payette, when she was up there doing her scientific space experiments, would it ever have occurred to her to worry about the fact that hair actually grows on her legs just like it does on her male colleagues? And clearly the answer is no. So that's just some context for all of what we're going to talk about in terms of the role media play, not only in creating opportunity to profile and amplify the voices of women who know stuff, but also the amplifying role the media do in disseminating images and messages that undermine women working in STEM fields' authority, not just with them, but with the broader society. So it's great that Julie Payette now is a household name. She's about to become the next Governor General, and people will be even more familiar with her as a result of that. And that's important because we need to be seeing and hearing female role models whenever and wherever we can who are not purely models, like the woman in the previous image. Wherever decisions are being made, they need to be more equitably represented. So just going back a minute to my story about David and I and the Catholic Church and his comments about the Pope and my failure to take advantage of that microphone, when you think about it, and even if you don't, I think about it, so I'm going to tell you, when we think about it, women, most adult women, spend decades of our lives either trying to avoid becoming pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or dealing with the consequences of having been pregnant, which last forever. Forever. And dramatically change not only our experiences in profound ways, but the way the world sees and treats us. And so if our voices are not represented, there are great swaths of human experience that are not being accounted for, that are not being incorporated. And when you consider that, in addition to that, as women, we're more likely to face pressure to live up to unattainable beauty standards. We are more likely to be feel physically vulnerable or threatened in underground parking lots or dark alleys. We're more likely to be paid less than our equally qualified male counterparts. And we're also more likely to have to deal with and juggle family caregiving responsibilities on either end of the demographic spectrum. And those experiences also influence in significant ways what we think, what we prioritize, what occurs to us as solutions, and those perspectives absolutely need to be integrated equitably into all of our public conversations. Let me give you a concrete example of when I first started really noticing this. So in the 1990s, for 3 years, I had a newspaper column in the Vancouver Sun once a week. And so I read the Sun religiously, and in those days it was all print. One day, on page 3, above the fold, that's prime clickbait location for those of you who never read an actual newspaper, so very prominent place, I saw this headline, page 3, and I'm thinking, don't we actually already know that women make 76 cents on the dollar or whatever it was? What's newsworthy about this? And so I read the article, and when I read it, what I discovered was the headline was not very accurate or useful. What the story was actually about was that if you had to pay women for all of the labor we perform in the community, in the home, that labor would be worth 40% of the GDP. And I thought, you know, if I'd written a headline, I think I'd have mentioned that. So the male headline writer who attached the previous line to the newspaper article was in no way attempting to denigrate women's contribution to the economy. Headline writers in those days, the job was you had to read the article and then you had to find 7 words that described the article and fit in the available space in the newspaper. All the headline writers at the Sun at the time were men. This was only 1995 or 6, not too long ago. But they just all happened to be men, and men, like women, like black people, like white people, like gays and lesbians, we all frame the world from the perspective that we own. We can't help but do that. And so when women's voices and perspectives are missing, sometimes it has significant consequences in terms of how we frame and describe things. So in our research, noticing over many years the underrepresentation of women's voices, we have, of course, acknowledged that there are some predictable reasons that men are more often quoted than others. There are more male CEOs still. There are more male politicians, notwithstanding Justin Trudeau's equitable cabinet. Women make up only 25% of the people in the in Parliament in Ottawa. So it's not surprising that people with a lot of power are going to get quoted more often than people who have less power, because the decisions they make have a greater impact on all of us. But what we found in our research was that even in fields where women dominate, education and healthcare among them. Men's voices in the 1990s still outnumbered women's significantly, even in those fields. The good news is that in 2017, all male panels like this get photographed by audience members and uploaded onto that website called All Male Panels, where if you do that, do you know about this? Anybody familiar with this? Next time you're at a conference, you see an all-male panel, you take out your phone, you photograph it, you upload it to allmalepanels.com, and they will put a picture of David Hasselhoff from Baywatch on it saying, "Congratulations, you have an all-male panel." So these days, this has become something we talk about. It's a source of ridicule. It's an acknowledgement by the public increasingly that this is not okay. This is not reflective of the knowledge that we need to know, we need to hear. Back to the responsibility that individual women bear. So what we know from now working with thousands of women across the country is that when a woman gets asked to comment, particularly by media, she is much more likely to say these words: "I'm really not the best person." And I would suggest to you that given the suppression and underrepresentation of women's voices over centuries, when a woman says those words, that's a sad day, not just for women everywhere or Catholic women everywhere, but for all of us, because it means that we are denied that level of diversity in terms of the conversation. And the truth is that the journalist calling you or the conference programmer is never asking you the question. I really want all of you to remember this, male and female. The journalist is never asking, are you the best person? And if you say no, especially as a woman, they're not going to find that mythical best person. They're going to go to the guy in the next office to you, or the person. But it's going to be more likely a guy. And when they do, this is what he's going to think and say. Yeah, okay, sure. Sad day for Catholics everywhere. I know stuff. You're asking me, I must have an informed opinion. I certainly share it on other occasions, so why wouldn't I comment? And so what we encourage the women we train to do is imagine, okay, you're about to say, no, I'm not the best person. They're going to go to the guy in the next office, maybe across town, somebody you know. And he's going to say yes, and he's going to get on television, or he's going to speak at the conference. And he may be brilliant, but he also may be no more brilliant than you are. And what you've just done is handed off an opportunity to amplify his voice where you could have had the ultimate things that flow from that increased visibility. Oh, great. I have a technical fail here. I've just managed to go from my slide presenter's view to the regular view. I'm so happy you're still in the room. I don't know how I did that. Can you get me back to... It would be nice if I knew this deck so well that I could predict the image that was about to come up, but I don't. If there's not an easy way, I'll just wing it, but... That's okay. Thank you so much. So, anytime you get called and asked to step up, this is what I'm going to encourage you to say. Because you were. Usually you'll get it by email these days. That's one of the great things about email. There aren't very many, but that's one of them. But if somebody gets you on the phone and wants you to do something, you start here. I'm just in the middle of something, which was true. You ask them what it is that they want, and you then take 10 minutes to think about what value might I have to add. What is the intersection between what they're asking and what I do know, the courses I've taken, the research I've done, the thinking I've done, the experience, whatever it is. You look for the intersection because there will be one or you wouldn't have been called in the first place. And then you call the journalist or the conference programmer back and you say, here's what I could talk about. This is in no way you claiming to be the best person. This is simply you opening the door to a conversation that may lead to you being able to enlighten people about something that you know. Maybe you'll end up talking about something, not what the journalist had in mind, but you're still amplifying your voice and views. One of the things we really want to deliver to women across the country is that every time we self-edit by taking ourselves out of the game, we are in effect extending the silencing that has gone on for centuries. And we cannot any longer be responsible for that. Bad enough that it was done to us, we cannot take that on and extend it. So Informed Opinions, as Leslie mentioned, is all about training and mentoring and supporting and motivating women who know stuff in every field. But we've done lots of work with women in STEM fields because of the particular challenges that continue to confront women in science and technology, engineering and math. And we're looking to amplify your voices and support you in ensuring that the perspectives that get shared are more representative. I mentioned we had done research in 2010. The most recent research we did in 2015 found this ratio, so some improvement. Women's voices now at 29%, men's at 71%. Business media, however, is closer to 5-to-1 still. And I know that Dr. Shannon just assigned her class the exercise of trying to find examples of stories that covered women in the media. I'll be really curious to see what kind of results you discover. As a companion piece to the training that we do and the research that we do in Informed Opinions, we have also just launched a database of women experts to make it easier for journalists to find women who know stuff and who have agreed that they will respond to journalists and programming requests by saying, here's what I could talk about. So I didn't go on our website to find out how many women from SFU we have, but there are probably lots of women at this institution who could and should be featured in expertwomen.ca. On the other hand, we understand why women do say no more often than men. Does anybody know who this is? Does the name Heidi Rosen ring a bell for any of you? So Heidi Rosen is a very, very successful entrepreneur. And in 2003, the Harvard Business School featured Heidi Rosen's success as an entrepreneur in a case study that they shared with their students. Except that there was a catch, because half the students got the profile of Heidi, and half the students got the profile of Heidi under the name of Howard. You can already predict where this is going. The students all judged the person profiled as knowledgeable and competent and experienced and having leadership capacity, but they judged the entrepreneur named Heidi as an unlikable and undesirable boss. Same case study, same words on the page, whereas Howard was really likable and they'd be happy to work for him. So you're probably familiar with unconscious bias and how it is something that lives in all our hearts. Even 30-year strong feminists like me manifest unconscious bias in all sorts of circumstances. So this is one of the challenges. Women know that they will be held to a higher standard of authority, that they will be criticized for things that are perfectly acceptable in their male colleagues. That's why in the 1970s, 5 professional orchestras in the US began auditioning musicians behind a screen so that they were not able to tell whether the cellists and the horn players were male versus female. And when they started this, they increased female representation on their orchestras by 35% in 5 years. So when you take gender out of the equation, when you're able to hire solely on merit, women make the grade. Women are present. The costs of bias are not just individual, but global and systemic. So some of you may remember in 2008, during the global financial meltdown, then French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde was asked on a TV interview what could have been done to prevent the global financial collapse. And she said, if only Lehman Brothers had had a few sisters, we wouldn't be in this mess. Now, her quip was seen as a quip, but in fact, there is SSHRC-funded research in this Canada and additional research in France that backs that up. Global financial markets would, in fact, be more stable if there were more women in the senior levels of the industry helping to balance the testosterone and the orientation of the men who are there. So men are more inclined, whether it's socialization or biology, I'm not going there, but men are more inclined to take risks, and women are more inclined to consider consequences. And when you're talking about global financial issues, that balance would be helpful. So there is a lot of research now, 20-plus years worth of research making the business case for including women in all sorts of organizations and bodies at senior levels so that their insights, their orientations, their experience-informed opinions influence what comes out the other end. Pop culture is starting to do a much better job of underlining the contribution that women have made in STEMs and elsewhere. How many of you have seen this movie? So if you haven't seen it, it's a great movie, and it does obviously a really good job of making clear not only that women dominated the computer science industry in its origins, but that in this case, the woman played, I forget the actor's name, but it's Dorothy Vaughan, the woman in the middle. She actually was the one in the movie who figures out how to make the brand new IBM computer work. I don't know whether that detail was true, but it was certainly made for compelling narrative. And Katherine Johnson, also profiled in Hidden Figures, literally saved John Glenn's ass when he was hurtling into outer space. So these narratives are critically important because of the role that media play in either reinforcing or countering stereotypes and assumptions that we absorb by osmosis and that then manifest in unconscious bias. The New York Times Magazine a few years ago wrote a very compelling in-depth feature about what it took to keep people who were not the usual suspects in STEM careers or any career where white men in particular, dominated. And what the research profiled in the New York Times Magazine found was, this is a chemistry class at, I think, University of Texas. What they found was that the dropout rate among women and racial minorities was much higher than among white male students. And it was not because the white male students were better at chemistry or any of the other STEM fields, but because of the overwhelming messages, subtle and overt, that the non-traditional students were still getting. And what they discovered was that what made the most difference about who dropped out and who didn't was whether or not the students received messages like, you belong here. Other people like you have succeeded in this space. The doubts that you're having, those are normal. Other people have felt them too. And if instead the students got alternative messages, like you don't belong here, like even with asking for directions, women will still get lost, those are the kinds of things that we absorb and that feed into the pipeline problem where there are fewer women in some of these fields the higher up you get. Because despite the progress that we've made, and we've certainly made a lot of progress in the last 20 or 30 years, there are still significant problems, specifically and particularly in STEM fields. This was an article that was just published in April. There have been 5 other big news stories since this one related to what's gone on at Uber, the Google manifesto that probably many of you read or heard of. So those kinds of messages are ubiquitous, they're pervasive, and they have a seriously undermining effect. And that's why it's so important to see visible female role models who reinforce the other narrative that the New York Times Magazine referred to. So being able to see Natalie Panek, who is literally a rocket scientist, being able to see Indira Samarasekera, an engineer, a racialized woman, become the president of the University of Alberta, being able to see Dr. Shannon, who is also amplifying the voices of women in STEMs across the country through the initiatives that she and her other NSERC-funded colleagues are doing. This is profoundly important. The power of visible female role models, or visible role models of any kind, is truly significant. And so it makes a huge difference to be able to, and not just visible female role models, but visible, fully clothed female role models. I think, you know, one of the things when you talk to people who are not thinking about these issues and you say women are underrepresented in the media, they think, no, I see women all over the place. I see, and then, you know, they can name fashion models, they can name musical stars, they can name models, they can name anchors. But what they can't often name are experts, women who are authoritative in their field, being profiled or interviewed by virtue of their expertise as opposed to how they look or their performing abilities. I first discovered the power of visible female role modeling, or the media's job in amplifying voices, about the same time that I was studying in the communications department here at SFU. So I had just joined the board of Media Watch. I had become president. I don't know if I said this to your class. So I had just become president because even though I was not the most qualified person to talk about the portrayal of women in the media, I went to the bathroom at the wrong time. I came back, I was president. That's how it works. In underfunded women's organizations, there's no glass ceiling. Just so you know, if you're looking to rise up, you find an underfunded women's organization. So I'm president, and because I'm president, I'm living in Vancouver, and I get a phone call from a reporter at BCTV, and he says to me, the Miss Canada pageant has just been canceled, and we need someone who is not a beauty contestant to come on and talk about it. So I qualify. I went out onto the front steps of my apartment building. I looked into the camera and said how happy I was that a contest that treated women's bodies like cattle at an auction was no longer popular enough to support advertisers. I went in the house. I watched myself on TV. I felt pretty good that they used my soundbite. And then seconds after it aired, my ordinarily supportive mother was on the phone, and she said, "Honey, you looked awful." For the record, I didn't look awful. I was 28. No, how bad could I have looked? I'm 59 now. I didn't look awful. I was a little pale. I was not wearing the inch of makeup that Miss Canada 1990 and Miss Canada 1991 were wearing, and my 10 seconds was wedged between the two beauty queens. So in my mother's defense, I like to think it was her first appreciation of the fact that despite my many charms, I was not beauty contestant material, and she just never noticed before. But the juxtaposition made it a little hard to avoid. I don't tell you the story to discourage you from ever going on television. Just let them put the pancake makeup on you so you look as you know, Brown is the guy who's interviewing you. I tell you the story because I had way more to say than the 10 seconds they gave me. And so I channeled the rest of what I thought into a 750-word op-ed, which I submitted to the newspaper, which they published. And that just emboldened me. I thought, oh, okay, anybody can do this, and I have stuff to say about stuff I care about, and I'm going to do this more often. And so I did. And I very quickly discovered that having a public profile in the newspaper led to invitations to be on the radio or on television, led to speaking invitations. And every significant career opportunity or opportunity I've had to wield influence has come about in part as a result of that increased profile. So it's really clear that if you can't talk about something, you can't change it. And what I learned was that it was way easier to get opportunities to talk. It was way easier to get people to return my phone calls, to give money to causes or initiatives that I thought were important, to make change legislatively or policy when I had a public voice. And so that's why I founded Informed Opinions, to spread that message and make clear that it's not rocket science. You don't actually have to be Natalie Panek to share your views, your informed opinions through media, especially today, where the gatekeepers at the Globe and Mail or the Vancouver Sun are just one access to one point. And in fact, there are so many opportunities to disseminate your informed opinions today in ways that there were not 25 or 27 years ago. So we have trained, as I mentioned, more than 2,000 women across the country to take advantage of this knowledge, to learn how to make what they know accessible and engaging, to hook it to news stories that will make it more likely that people will pay attention, to use language that even a theater grad like me can understand, so that people don't switch channels the minute you get into jargon, because that is what they do. Over those 7 years, hundreds and hundreds of the women we have trained have published commentaries in the Globe and Mail, the Vancouver Sun, the Huffington Post, the Toronto Star, on CBC, pretty much everywhere. And that has allowed us to do another piece of research to answer the question, what difference does it actually make to public discourse when women's voices are present versus absent? So this word cloud that you're looking at was created out of 100 commentaries that the women we trained published in daily newspapers and online in this country. We took 100 op-eds. We created a word cloud because we wanted to see what issues came up most often. And then we took 100 op-eds written in the same publications during the same period of time from men, and we deducted the common words. And so what you're looking at are issues that only show up when women's voices are present. Just look at those words. Some of them are heartbreakingly predictable. Sexual assault, violence, that's predictable. Some of them are not so predictable. Food, water, dementia, treatment, charitable, racism, impact, energy, police, talk, decisions, representation. When women's voices aren't present, those issues are not getting discussed nearly to the extent that they would if women's voices were at 50%. Anybody know any of these women? So 2 years ago, Lawden, who's on the far side there, left in yellow, or my right, your left, she's the CEO of AxoSoft, an Arizona-based tech company. And she hired activist Tanya, who's in the middle, who is a creative disruptor. And Tanya worked with the woman in blue on the left, Sarah, the marketing director of AxoSoft, and they coined the brilliant, and so Sarah coined the slogan, but Tanya came up with the idea, and they gave birth to the now famous It was never a dress campaign. How many of you have heard of this? So this is a disruptive intervention in the media discourse around, not just, in their case, they're a tech company. So this is an image before you put the cape on her. This is an image we all have, we've absorbed a million times, which says to us, women wear dresses and men wear pants. So that alone is an unfortunate characterization, because lots of women wear pants and some men may well want to wear dresses. And as long as that's our binary, it's very limiting. So they disrupted that, and in the process started a conversation about female tech heroes. Once you've seen this image, you cannot look at that washroom silhouette ever again without picturing the alternative. And that's what we need to do. We need to be disrupting media all the time to change the picture, to change the image, to challenge people to think differently about gender and technology and how they operate and what goes with what. Even cartoonists are helping to further the dialogue. Now, Alice is not the best role model because some of her interventions involve knives and other weapons, but still. And it's not always easy. If you're the lone woman in the room and you're wanting to take credit for your idea, it's not always easy to be the one that is promoting yourself. This was discussed in Dr. Shannon's class earlier this afternoon. This cartoon is from the 1950s. It should be history by now, but it's not. It still elicits laughter of recognition because it still goes on. In fact, during the Barack Obama administration, many of the men in his inner circle had worked with Barack Obama for many years. They knew him really well, and they were bros. And the women in his administration, and to his credit, he appointed a lot of them, found it harder to be heard in those rooms. They experienced this not overtly. This is clearly not a scenario that happens. Most of the talking over women, taking their ideas, interrupting them is completely unconscious. I can say this because my husband does it to me all the time. He'll say to me, "Oh, I had this great idea. I think we should do this." And I'll nod and I'll say, "Yeah, I suggested that to you a week ago over dinner." And he's now trained and he will acknowledge that. So I don't think it's malice most of the time on behalf of men. I think it's just part of the water in which we swim. So it's hard to overcome that on your own, but what they did in the Obama administration was that the women developed an echo and ally strategy, so that when one woman spoke up in a meeting, another woman would say, "Great idea, Sarah," or if some guy repeated what she had said, the other person would say, "Oh, I'm so glad you agree with Sarah's idea." There was a way to reinforce when women are speaking and allow them to be heard. In 2008, I had moved to Ottawa, where I live now, and I was invited onto CBC television to debate the dubious merits of a television commercial, a beer commercial. And the beer commercial, just before I get there, I have to tell you, I was having a bad hair day, but my mother was out of the country, so I went on TV anyway. The beer commercial featured, scantily clad women in a bar, and the camera angles panned up and down their bodies, and it was kind of predictable sexualization, objectification in advertising. And I said what probably many of you could easily have said, which is just, really, haven't we outgrown the objectification of women to sell beer? And especially given what we know about the incidence of alcohol and date rape, the likelihood of date rape involving alcohol is very high. And so why would an advertiser choose to reinforce sexualizing women and beer? When I returned home, I received an email from a young woman who lived in Toronto. She was an artist. Her name was Jennifer. And she emailed me to say how much she appreciated, this is one of her paintings, how much she appreciated my words on television because 10 years before she had been gang raped at a party. And she had spent 10 years in therapy trying to paint her way out of her pain. And so she was never going to be able to go on television and provide the analysis that I had. But she so appreciated seeing someone else articulate and call out and challenge the advertisement. With Jennifer's permission, and she specifically said that every time she saw an ad like the one we debated or a ubiquitous fashion image that we see often on billboards or in magazines that collapses the notion of sexuality and violence and implies that women want to be raped, every time she would see an image like this one or the beer ad, she would relive the gang rape. With her permission, I removed her identifying information and forwarded the email she sent to me to the advertising executive who had been on television with me defending the ad. And to his credit, he responded almost immediately, and he said essentially, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I never would have created an image that I thought would relate to real women's lives. I never made the connection, and I will never defend or produce an objectifying image again. Thank you for sharing that with me." So my experience is that many men are willing allies. Some aren't, that's clear, but many men, probably the majority of men, are willing allies. They want to understand women's context. They don't want to be that guy. And so the fact that they are inadvertently writing the wrong headline or whatever it is, over talking in the meeting, there's an opportunity to enlighten them, bring them along. I have a new colleague, Kelly. She just started work with me this week. She used to work for Compute Canada. And in her capacity at Compute Canada, she was dealing with really brilliant high-performance computing guys, and most of them were guys. And she invited the men she worked with to go to women in their field who were at their level and ask them these 2 questions. Has your gender been a barrier? Have you ever encountered bad behavior? And they came back to her visibly shaken because they heard stories from their female colleagues that were so different from their own experience in the field. They suddenly had an appreciation that if you were a woman at their level in their field, you had put up with unbelievable shit. You had had to overcome all sorts of things that a male in the same circumstances would never deal with. So those men were transformed into much more sensitive allies as a result of just having those conversations. And that's why it's important for women to speak up and to share their realities, to bring male allies along. This is my grandson, Samuel. I love him beyond description. He is curious and sensitive and loving. And I would really like him to stay that way. I would really like him to grow up in a culture that allows men to be curious and sensitive and loving. To not think that it's manly to brag about your sexual prowess, to intimidate women, to denigrate women for how they look. Somebody who's not threatened by strong women. And he has a very strong woman in his life. This is Charlotte, his little sister, who we both love beyond description. She's going through a sticker phase at the moment. Doesn't she deserve the same opportunities, the same respect, protection from violence, the ability to do her work without dealing with what women in high-performance computing are dealing with? I'm sure Sam thinks so. And all of us, in envisioning the world that we want, also appreciate the difference it will make if we allow girls and boys to grow up being fully human, all of them, in having a voice, in sharing their talents and insights. So this is our project. We're going to bridge the gender gap in Canadian public discourse by 2025. And given what I've just told you, that might sound like a rash promise, but we actually know that it's achievable because some media are already representing women at par, and that means that everybody can, if they make use of the women in our database who are easy to find. If those of you who have the capacity to speak up and share information about things you know, say yes when you're given the opportunity. A Radio-Canada show called La Sphère, which deals with tech issues, last year tracked the men and women that they were interviewing on their technology show, and they managed to reach par. 50% of their guests were female, and their audience figures went up. So it's not only possible, it's actually not only advisable, it's actually desirable from all sorts of perspectives. So you can say yes in order to be a part of our success and be able to say, I was there when Shari Graydon said they were going to bridge the gender gap, and now they have, and I was part of it. Here are the ways that you can be part of it. You can speak up when you're asked. You can encourage other women, other diverse minorities to be present, to not silence themselves. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You can amplify the work that we're doing, the work that Dr. Shannon is doing, to draw attention to the contributions that the full population is capable of making. In a couple of weeks, we'll have a new infographic and 2 videos, one of which puts our message into spoken word format, because although I think op-eds are really valuable, you get 750 words to make an argument, and you can do a good job of that in 750 words. I'm embracing a new format to reach even younger people with this message, and so I'm going to, with your indulgence, perform the piece that we're going to make a video of, and you're going to be my test audience, and this is it. Should actually be using your mic, but I'll use this one instead. So, take the mic, woman. Don't take a hike. It's a gift, girl. Someone going to amplify your views? That's news. A privilege that most women in your village, country, world will never get. So you can't let it go. No. Do not decline any chance to speak a line or 9. Opine. Step up. Speak out. Don't twist. Just shout. You hesitate, you take a minute to say, no, I must confess I'm not the best. Who asked you that? Nobody, no how, not ever, not now. If you get called, we'll be appalled if you say no, because who will they try? You know, that guy, and sure, he's smart enough, but not the best above the rest. No way. This day you can decide not to hide nor bide your time till you feel ready, steady. Just say, yes, here's what I know. You go, girl, sister, matriarch. We cannot park our insights anymore. It's much too late. The planet's state needs Mother Nature to ensure the future of your kids and mine. It's way past time for us to speak our mind, to claim our voice is not a choice. So please, girl, woman, take the mic. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions if we have time, and I also have books. If anything that I said resonated with you, for $10, you too can share and spread the message with other people who weren't here but should have heard it.
So I guess at this point I'd like to open up for some questions if anybody has some they want to. Remember, take the mic, be brave.
Yes.
Oh,
or comments or.
I'll quiet it down in the mic. I did some work like this at UBC. I met Shari a few years ago, and I'm happy to hear the same-ish messages again updated. One of my favorite phrases when trying to affect change in this world is what gets measured gets done. And I just don't know if Informed Opinions has very specifically provided any data, if you guys know of any people doing that really great media tracking, who's doing what percentage of voices, what percentage of bylines, things like that. Do you have any info about that?
So I swear I did not set her up to do this, but we are launching on Parliament Hill on October 18th, which is Person's Case Day, a new campaign that is called What Gets Measured Gets Done. And we don't have the resources to do tracking, but when we've done content analysis before, it's been very labor intensive. We've had people looking with grids and laboriously counting and recording. One of our high performance computing advisors tells us that there's a way to scrape data. So we're looking for a researcher who's interested in this issue, who would like to collaborate with us so that we can, in fact, do more monitoring, and every year on October 18th or around, update the report card to say, okay, here are the folks we're celebrating because they're doing a great job, and here are the people who maybe you as news consumers could encourage to do a better job to better reflect their audiences. Thank you.
And I can actually vouch, she actually mentioned this in our class, which was before this talk, so you're good. Anybody else? We have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying that by far the majority of my experience talking to media has been very, very positive. One time in particular I'm thinking of, when I spoke to somebody who then wrote an article, I felt that my opinion was framed in a very particular way. And I'm wondering, do you have tools or ways of encouraging people to not, or to deal with that after the fact even? Just because I felt that after that instance, there were definitely a few months where I didn't want to speak up.
Right. So great question, and I have a few suggestions. One is, we almost all of us now have smartphones that have a recording function. So when you're doing an interview, you can say to the interviewer, for my own purposes, I'm going to record the interview because I'm trying to get better at speaking in sound bites or not using jargon, and then you can record. And then the journalist knows that you have a record of what you said, and they're going to be hopefully a little bit more careful about the way that they quote you. And in a print article, they can take things out of context. They can frame. They can do that broadcast as well, but it's a little bit harder. So that's definitely one thing. If you are speaking to a print reporter or broadcast, you don't want to spend an hour or 45 minutes or even half an hour, because the longer you speak to the journalist, if it's not live, the more material they have to pull from, and the likelihood of them using what you most want them to use is significantly reduced because they have too much other stuff to wade through. So that's also something to think about. You're busy, you say, yep, I can talk to you. I've only got 10 minutes. And that's a good thing to do, unless it's a reporter that you really trust, you have a long relationship, and you're just providing information on background. That also is a useful thing to do. So those are two strategies. They're not never fail. The one other thing I would say is, if you're in an interview, even if it's a live broadcast interview and the journalist is trying to steer you into a corner or a box, it's clear that they want you to say X, and you don't want to say X because you don't believe X, you can call the journalist out and say, it feels like you want me to go in a particular direction, and that's actually not what the evidence shows. So I'm going to stick to what I know, which is this. And then the journalist will be a little bit chastened and understand that, okay, she's on to me. I better just ask questions instead of trying to lead the witness. Others of you have had media experience? Good, bad, indifferent? Yeah.
Any one last question, and then, we have a reception and people can talk to Shari, look at her books. They're pretty funny. I like the graphics.
This is the problem. This question period, which I ran into, is standing between you and the food.
It really is. And it's good food.
Oh.
and they have to eat it. You can't leave without eating the food. It's free food. There's no tax. The tax is you have to eat the food. Well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let us close this up. Before we go, I do have a few closing notes just because you can't run something this big without having all sorts of things to acknowledge. So first, obviously, I'd like to thank, where'd she go? Oh, there she went. Shari Graydon again, if we could maybe thank her again for a great talk. And, I'm so glad I have notes. You don't get to. Before you go, I would like to give you a talking stick. This is a lovely piece of art that was crafted by Jim Yelton from the Coast Salish Nation. And the eagle is a symbol of great strength and leadership. And I've been feeling for this colloquium, this is good symbolism for these ladies who have been coming to speak to us.
This is the nicest gift I have ever received. I've been speaking for 7 years. This is the perfect. Thank you.
I'd also like to take a moment to recognize the colloquium sponsors. This is really a joint effort. There are 10 departments who sponsored the content and helped me derive the actual course, but there were also a huge number of people who helped fund the speakers and everything else. So I'd like to thank SFU President's Office, the Department of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, the Vice President Research Office, Key Big Data Initiative, NSERC, Tableau, my own chair, West, the SFU Faculty of Applied Sciences, as well as the School of Computing Science. And again, Shari Graydon's Informed Opinions also was a sponsor for this talk because she's not free. And so she was really willing to come out here at an affordable price. So thank you all for coming out tonight. And we really hope you can join us for the rest of the talks in the series. The next one is actually being given by a man. I know it's Women in Technology. But he's a fantastic researcher in social psychological phenomena. Say that 3 times fast. His name is Dr. Stephen Spencer. He'll be speaking here on October 12th. And we really hope you can come out because it's fantastic. He is an absolute ally, and he's going to be talking about all these things like unconscious bias and, no, it's not just a woman thing. It's real. So I hope to see you all then. Again, please enjoy the reception and check out the books. Take care.